This is episode 13 of the FAB Podcast on WiSP Sports Radio.
Excuse me. Yeah.
The FAB Podcast is the weekly show brought to you by Females in Athletic Business for women in the sports business, where we believe that women in sport deserve equal coverage. Welcome to this week's episode. My name is Kristin Ray, and I am the founder of Females in Athletic Business. Today, we are excited to be commemorating the first 6 months of the FAB Podcast. I'm joined by President, CEO, and Executive Producer of WiSP Sports Radio, Chris Stafford. She's the brains behind the organization that makes our podcast possible every week, WiSP Sports. Welcome, Chris.
Well, thank you. How strange this is to be on the other side of the microphone, so to speak, instead of producing your weekly show, to be a guest. So thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. You normally just have to quietly sit and listen, and today we're lucky to have you on with us. So Females in Athletic Business has been partnering with WiSP to produce this podcast for about 6 months now, and I think it's really important that our listeners get to hear from you exactly who WiSP Sports is and all that they have to offer our listeners and women who are sports-minded everywhere.
Well, WiSP Sports is a global women's sports network with the largest women's sports podcast network in the world, with now over 30 shows, more than 20 hosts, and a global audience reach now of 1.8 million and climbing, which is very exciting. And it started officially as WiSP Sports, although it did have a predecessor to this, which was the podcast focusing on one sport. And 2 years ago, when we decided to expand and cover all sports, that's really was the turning point for us, and we officially became WiSP Sports. So now we've grown considerably over that period of time, grown the podcast audience, but we also, as you mentioned, we have blogs, we have video series, and we have articles. So we do all of those things, really covering any sport for women around the world. We want to really, as I will say, just turn on the microphone for these women to tell their stories, Kristin, because there are so many different aspects of women's sports, both on and off the field of play, that we want to cover. And of course, all the issues as well, which are very topical right now.
So relevant. Women's causes in general, obviously in our culture and our society right now, are so relevant. And then you add in how relevant women in sport are right now. And so I just think you're doing such great work giving voice to women who wouldn't normally have one. And on that note, tell our listeners what originally interested you and WiSP about FAB and bringing FAB into your already really large podcast family.
I think it's to the point I made earlier, Kristin, it's really, there's so many aspects to women in sport. It isn't just about the athletes on the field of play, so to speak. There's so many different aspects of business and ways in which that women can get involved. Young girls, young graduates can become involved. They may start off as a graduate thinking, I don't really want to be an athlete. I may have done sports as a child, as a youth, but don't want to become a professional athlete. But our message to them is, well, look at all the other opportunities. You love sports, but look at all the other opportunities that are out there for women in business. So from WiSP's point of view, we see all of this as one big family of women in the sports world, in the sports arena, as an umbrella really to it all.
Well, and that was one thing that was really important to me when I created Females in Athletic Business, was reminding women who are sports-minded, who may not be athletes or maybe were athletes in their past, definitely aren't coaches necessarily, that there are ways to put your passion for sports to work for you. Because I was never the athletic type, unfortunately, and I think not having been a super talented athlete made me appreciate athletics more than maybe even some people who are really great athletes, and made me my passion grew out of my appreciation for sport. And that's what made me want to work in athletics. And so I really appreciate the fact that you noticed that there was a void kind of in the podcast industry for a voice for women working in sports and not just coaching it or playing it. So I really appreciate that you recognize that. You were willing to give us a shot. And now I feel like our podcast is really on its way. And we've covered topics like salary negotiation. We have a recurring segment called, that revolves around mental health at work for women. We've talked about networking at sports events, social media for our careers. Knowing all of that and having listened to, and sat through all those podcasts silently, what has been the most memorable episode, in your opinions, that we've done so far in the past 6 months, and what has really struck you about it?
I'm not going to give you the answer that you want because it isn't one episode. It is absolutely not one single episode, Kristin. When I'm listening to all of these, there are so many nuggets from all of the shows. When you look at all the different topics that you've covered already in just the space of 6 months, there are bits from all of them. It's like a little cornucopia of information, for women in every aspect of working in the sports business. So, yeah, I'm not going to be able to pick out one single episode. I would say to anyone that's hearing this maybe for the first time, they should really listen to them all. And I mean that sincerely, because they will take something from every one of those episodes that is helpful to them, that is constructive and a resource to them.
I agree. And, I was a guest on another female empowerment sports related podcast last night. And I think that one thing that's really important to say that I don't know if we stress enough, maybe when we summarize things for the website, is we start out every podcast with hearing about the journey that whoever our guest has taken to the point that they're at. So we've talked to all sorts of guests, whether they're college students all the way to women who are in what you might call the twilight of their careers, and everyone in between, young professionals, who you might consider middle-aged professionals. And we get their journeys at the beginning of the show, because I think it's so important to hear how different every woman in this industry has come to their place. They all have different stories about who's mentored them. Maybe they lacked a mentor, and they kind of came up on their own, or maybe they had a really strong female mentor, or maybe they have a great message about a wonderful, man that has mentored them in the industry. But they all have such different stories about how they got there. And I think that information sometimes is just as valuable to learn from as the maybe like nuts and bolts information that they're there actually to share on the podcast. So I think that's something to remember when you're deciding, maybe you have half an hour and you just got one episode's worth of time to pick right at that moment. Go on our website, go on WiSP's website, and really take a look at who's in that episode and think about what they might have to offer just with their journey, not just with their message, because there's something for everybody, like Chris said, in every episode. But I wanted to talk about what might have been, I don't want to say my favorite episode or my favorite guest, but one topic that I think really enlightened me and really gave me some hope, Chris, was the episode that we had the young college students on, and I guess one had just graduated. Do you remember that episode? Well, we had them on talking about, these are two really successful so far young women, one being going into her senior year in college and one being just having graduated and entering her first job. And the reason we did this episode was because there are so many young women, whether they're still in school or just about to leave school, who come to me. I had another one this week come to me and just be like, I don't know how all these girls around me have these wonderful internships or they're getting these great jobs. And no matter what I do, I can't find them, or I'm not getting the interviews. And having not taken a super direct route to my job in sports, I don't really have, a great answer for what to do, because I kind of took a really indirect route. And so I didn't know what to say to these girls. So I knew that there were two women who are members of our organization who have done it right and gotten themselves some really wonderful internships in the industry, and even found her first job in the industry pretty quickly based on all her great experience. So that's one of my favorite episodes, having just these young women on who, you forget how amazing the women who are involved in our industry are, because if they're being so involved that they're members of the organization or they're wanting to be on the podcast, chances are they are the most qualified young women that we have in the industry. And to hear how many applications, Chris, that they put in, I think they said something like 60 applications for an internship, got them 6 interviews and 2 offers. And then obviously they chose one job. And I just thought that information about how much work they actually had to put in to get the results that they're so proud of was really valuable information in reminding young women how much work they need to put in if they want a career in this industry. So I really liked that episode. And I know you were pretty wowed by them too at the end of that episode.
Yes, absolutely. Really fired up by their energy. What's good to hear about that generation, for someone who is of a different generation, Kristin, is that, when I hark back to my early days, and the passion and the dedication and the hard work that I brought to the sport. I was a professional in a sport for a number of years. That, in my teens and in my early 20s, it was right there in their voices. They were just as passionate. They were just as excited and energized and dedicated and determined. And as you said, there's a case in point when they put so many applications in for an internship. They know where they want to go in their career. And at that point in your life, it's really helpful. I think, a lot of people don't know their journey then. And of course, the journey can change. I can tell you stories about that. But I think when you listen to those, those younger people who are just starting out in their careers into the sports business, that understand it, that have the intellect and already some experience, the skill sets, they are fresh and they are ready to break out into the sports business world. And it really is inspiring. And I think anyone who is out there is thinking, oh, maybe I don't have the confidence, maybe I don't have the skills. They may have graduated, they may not just have the confidence level that these young people did, and the ones that we heard on the show and we continue to hear. Then I think this is where they should listen to the podcast, because they will be fired up by that. And I think inspired, don't you?
So inspired. And when I was also talking about this yesterday with someone, I always go back to how different my journey was to, for example, the young women we were just talking about. They are so intentional and so direct about their choices for their futures and for their future careers. And not having been that direct, I always knew I wanted to work in sports, but I didn't have the guidance, and maybe a little bit because I didn't seek it out, and maybe a little bit because stuff like FAB and WiSP didn't exist at that point in my career, in my college education. But I felt like I was lacking that direction, and I did not consciously put myself on a path to working in sports. And so I got here based on hard work, meeting the right people, and having things kind of come my way. And so I wish that WiSP and FAB existed at that point for me, because I could have been listening once a week and taking steps once a week based on what these experts were telling me on the podcast, and really that would have maybe helped me develop the confidence to be more direct and more intentional in my career choices. So even if you're at that point, kind of where I was, where like, you want sports to be a big part of your life and possibly your career, but you feel like you're behind the 8 ball when you listen to girls like Remy and like Jasmine who have it together at, age 20. Use this podcast, use the other podcast, use the resources on our website to kind of start the intentional process, start the choice making to be more direct toward that goal. And don't be discouraged, because there are so many different ways, like we've heard from our guests, so many different ways to get to those goals. There isn't just one way. And so I think that's another really important message of our podcast, of our organization. And I think I told you this yesterday, but I have something exciting to talk about regarding an upcoming guest that we're going to have before the end of the month. We're going to record a session, and I'm really excited. Her name's Christina. She is the Community Relations Manager for the National Football League, and we were able to get her booked for recording by the end of the month. And the show should, I believe, air that first week in July. And so these are the type of guests that we're really starting to build with our work, Chris, with the podcast. And she's going to her show is going to be talking, because she does community relations, she's going to talk to us about the importance of women mentoring women. And that is something that I know you're very passionate about, right?
Yes, I really am, because I think you can't be what you can't see is the expression that's going around these days. And I think it really rings true, especially in the sports arena where we're often, faced with a male-dominated environment, and we don't see as many role models that are women as much as we like. So when you get these women who are very successful and leaders in the sports arena, I think that right there is proof to young graduates, any women that want a career in the sports arena, that, you can do it. Women are making it. And look at all the guests that you've had that have proven that.
Yeah, I just in talking to her via email so far, she's doing things on her own, unrelated, I believe, to her work at the NFL, but because of her work at the NFL, she's been willing to start. I don't know the technology, but we'll get you more information by the time she comes on the show. But she has started these calls where young women can call into group calls and get kind of like a question answer session with her. And I believe she does it on a regular basis, because she gets so many young women who are wanting to do like a meet and greet with her, or, question answer session, or take her to coffee or do lunch with her, that the demand for her wisdom and for her knowledge is so high that she's started to try to figure out different ways to depart that wisdom on a more mass media type of way. So when I came to her, and Jerica, who was on a couple episodes ago with us, recommended her to me, which was lovely of her. And but when I approached Christina about it, she was so excited, because she thought that WiSP and FAB really lined up with how she was trying to impart her wisdom that she's come across so far in her career to young women more on a mass level. So it's really lining up with how women in our industry are looking to help other women. And so that episode that we're going to have, which talks about the importance of women mentoring women of all ages, of all spots in their career, I think is going to be it's a good reminder for those of us who are really busy. I get so busy sometimes at work, as we all do, and it would be a lot easier to just do everything myself, not let anyone in. But then I remember I have young women who work for me, and it's better for everyone if I can, give them an insight into what I do and how I make my decisions. And so she's really going to stress to all of us who know but need a reminder, and maybe those of us who haven't had the opportunity to mentor another woman in the industry, to really hopefully ignite that and pass it along, because most of us have a story of being mentored by a woman in this industry. And so if we can possibly pass that on, it will only do us all so much better in the industry. So Chris, before I let you go, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving my organization, Females in Athletic Business, a voice in a spot where we didn't have a voice. We didn't know how to impart everything we wanted to give to everyone. I've got, 500 or 600 women across the country in 26 states and actually 3 countries who are interested in invested in this organization and what we have to offer. But we were really struggling with a way to bring our information, our education to these women in a way that worked for their schedule, worked for their budget, and wasn't too much of a commitment for them. And this was something, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, we were really struggling with, and I was worried about the future of FAB. And so the fact that your WiSP came to us with this idea, with the openness, open arms, open mind, I just really, really want to say thank you 6 months in. I think we're doing a great job. And I hope you're really proud of the fact that you're producing it. And I hope you really believe in us every week.
I absolutely do. All of the above there, Kristin. And I think it's a great job what you're doing. And the content is so valuable. It really is. So it's been my pleasure. And I think you're really getting some legs here. And, you'll be running on your own before you know it.
Well, we find you and WiSP absolutely invaluable. And I hope listeners that at the end of this kind of review show that you take this as inspiration to check out some of our past episodes. We've talked about mental health at work. We've talked about how to network properly when you're out at events so you're not wasting your time. We've talked about how to make your social media work for you. So all of those things are as resources on the WiSP website and the FAB website. And we're really excited in the coming months. Like I mentioned, we're going to be talking to a female that works in management for the NFL. We're going to be continuing our salary negotiation series coming up with Kathy, our PGA professional. And we're going to hear some more about how to make social media work for us. We learned a lot about LinkedIn. Now we're going to learn a little bit about Twitter. So I also want to put out there for our listeners, please, if there's something you want to learn about or you're struggling with in your career, shoot us an email or a tweet and let us know. We'll find the expert and we'll get them on the air. And that's what we love doing. And we want to make sure we're giving you exactly what you need. Last, before we leave, I want to say thank you again to Chris and to WiSP Sport. And for more conversations from the world of women's sport, please visit wispsports.com, where you'll find more than 800 podcast episodes, blogs, videos, and articles. WiSP Sports Radio is the world's largest podcast network for women's sports, with 30 shows and 20 hosts around the world. Subscribe for free on your favorite podcast app. And to follow my organization, Females in Athletic Business, or this podcast, or WiSP Sports, use @FabSports.org and @WiSP Sports on all your social media. The FAB Podcast is a co-production of Females in Athletic Business and WiSP Sports. Check out Females in Athletic Business at www.fabsportsorg.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the FAB Podcast. Thanks so much. See you next week.